Hello everybody and welcome to my tutorial and progress of making Disney's Anna dress. This tutorial is for the blouse that she wears underneath the bodice. Now there are hundreds of patterns out there for blouses, but to make a life a lot easier you can use a nice simple pattern. I am choosing New Look pattern 6732, and although this particular shirt was designed to have darts in it, I've done some reshaping because I didn't really need the darts. After reshaping it slightly, this has become my back piece, done on a fold. These are my two front sections. Now on the original blouse pattern, the edge only came to about here, but for what we need to do, we need to extend it out 5 centimeters. So I've carried on this line, straightened it off, and added 5 centimeters to the original pattern piece. I've also done the same the other side, but I won't be actually needing that much the other side, so I thought for now it was just easier to cut the two pieces out at the same time with the same width, but I'll probably be losing a bit of that later. Now before we actually put any pattern pieces together, I've actually used my overlocking machine to go around the edges and neaten them off. If you don't have a overlocking machine, you can use a zigzag stitch, but it's not quite as good. So we've done that to all of our pieces. Next, join your shoulder seams together. So about 1 centimetre in. And it should look like this. Do the same for the other side as well. Next, cut out your sleeve pattern. This is our basic pattern piece. And run a gathering stitch, preferably on machine because it's neater, from roughly where my finger is, all the way around, just about 1 centimetre in or just over, and finish about there. Don't gather from here to here because that goes under the arm. And next, on both your sleeves you need to find your halfway point and mark it with a pin. You'll probably note when you've cut out your pattern pieces that you need to cut out 2 notches on one side and 1 notch on the other, because the angle is slightly different on a sleeve from the front to the back. So when you come later to match up your notches, make sure on your actual blouse itself you're matching the 2 cut to the 2 and then the 1 to the 1. This will indicate your front and back. Take your blouse, and after ironing your seams flat on where you've joined the shoulders together, just put in a couple of pins. That just helps keep these flaps nice and flat. Okay, going back to what I said earlier about your notches, I've got 2 notches on the side here on the back section, 2 notches on the sleeve, and they should match together. To take the halfway point on your sleeve and line it up with the shoulder seam, and your halfway point is where you mark that pin. Make sure, because this is obviously your armhole and these will be your sides, so make sure your sleeve is pointing inwards. You don't sew it this way because that won't work, okay? So we're just going to match those up. I've now joined the 2 together and also removed the pins that were here previously. So just make sure that's nice and flat. Next, go to the other end of your sleeve where we had the two notches, and make sure these two bits line up edge to edge. You might find that your notches might be slightly out by 1/2 centimetre, but don't worry about it. Okay, this is where it starts getting a bit fiddly. You then have to go to the other side of your sleeve here and make sure that the other edges line up as well. And then down here is your side section. So it kind of looks a little bit messy at the moment. This is where the gathering will come in. Okay, going from your centre point, you need to pull up a little piece of thread using a needle. We gather in 2 bits because it makes it easier to control your gathers. And you've basically got to fit this into that space there. So that's where the gathering in this is. There's a lot more fabric in this at this point. We need to reduce that. Once you've evenly spaced your gathers, it should look like this. You then need to move on to the other half of the sleeve, of course making sure the back is flat. Once you've done that part, it should look like this. That's the part that's gathered, and underneath, as said, make sure it's flat. Next, while you still have your pins in place, it's a good idea to tack and secure your sleeve edges with a different coloured thread, so that when you can take all your pins out and you can run it under the machine a lot more easily. I recommend tacking very close to where you've done your gathering stitch, as you can see in the video. Next, you need to sew your sleeve in on the machine. Once it's done, it should look like this. You will then be able to take out your tacking thread. Now, I know I'm not the best person in the world to sew in sleeves, but this is more or less what it should look like when it's finished. So that's for that part. Okay, next thing to do is a trial fit, and to fit the front, very helpful to have somebody turn the ends of these in, just to make sure, all the way down your edges. What will be happening is I'll be sewing some velcro onto here and using a velcro fastening for the front of the blouse. So that will just go over the top like so. First of all though, to help me, what I did is, while I've got it turned over with just some pins in, is I've gone over it with the iron, so I've got a crease here, because then I'm going to take out all the pins on this left hand side and sew one piece of the velcro to it, which you'll see in a minute. Just to quickly show you, I've turned my edges over by approximately 2 centimetres on each side. Okay, you can just about see here the crease line where it was folded over. I then unfolded it So when I come to sew my velcro on, I know if I've gone over that line I've gone too far. So basically you start sewing 1 centimetre approximately down from the top, which you'll see why later on, and making sure you've got the right side of your velcro you're sewing down here. You have one side with hooks and one side, the other side has like the show you here, like the fuzzy fluffy stuff I'll call it. So anyway, I've just gone ahead and sewn that down, and then I've stopped at the bottom about a centimetre in as well, and I do exactly the same for the other side, except obviously this will be turned back over like that, so then that will overlap like so. So you'll be sewing the other strip of velcro straight on top here, centimetre down from the top again, making sure it lines up with your other side. Okay, next up, making the collar. Right, the style is a mandarin collar, and this is my pattern piece, which needs to be cut on the fold. So I'll cut my pieces over here. So basically make sure your fabric's folded, put your pattern piece on, then open it out. There we go. There we go, that's better. This is more or less what it should look like when it's open out. Now you need to cut your outer fabric, and you need something stiff to stiffen a collar. Now you can use an iron-on or non-iron-on interfacing, but I'm going to try this stiffener fabric. Something like upholstery fabric, and I'm going to use the same fabric to line it with. So that's 3 sections to my collar. Okay, next take your liner piece, your outer fabric and your stiffener, place them all together in the order that you see here. So 2 blue pieces and then one of the, I'll say, creamy coloured pieces. Pin them all together and sew along the top from there to there. Don't sew across the bottom, leave that open. Next, clip your corners with a pair of scissors. Careful not to go through your sewing line. Just need 3 little cuts like so on both sides, and then you'll need to turn it inside out. I forgot to say before we turn it inside out to cut down your excess interfacing fabric like so it is slightly shorter than the blue stuff.
Right, sorry about this folks, but we hit a little bit of a snag when we were putting the collar together. When I was trying to do the embroidered edge, it was too thick going through all the layers, so I've had to take a step backwards, and I've actually taken the collar to pieces, and what you can see there is just some tacking where I've tacked on the interfacing, and then using my sewing machine I've satin stitched and did the pattern on that side only, and then the next step will be to put it back together again. But if you want to see what stitches we used on our machine, right, the zigzag stitch that I used on my machine is number 18. So I turn my dial around to number 18, and it's in the purple zone according to my machine. So I've made it the stitch as small as possible on the setting. Then to do the satin stitch, put my dial around to number 2, which is the satin stitch setting, and then turn the dial to the very smallest setting on the satin stitch, so it sews very close together. Before you actually ever go on your collar, make sure you do a practice piece first to make sure you got it right. I'm going to try and describe to you how we measured for the collar and where the position of the final collar will be. You've already sewn on your velcro pieces, so we need to turn this side over when it's finished and just leave a little overlap like that. But for now we'll just join up your velcro pieces like so, and then just allow for that little bit of an overlap like that, and just hold it in place. Now with the collar done, I'll just show you where it's going to be, and hopefully you'll be able to understand what I'm trying to do. Just move that down a bit. Okay, when the satin stitch edge comes down, you want it to continue down on this side of your blouse. So if you position your collar like so, this piece of stitching is going to continue down onto your blouse on this edge. So this is where you'd like your collar to finish. So if you allow for a little bit of an overlap for your seam, this is where you'll start the position for measuring. So actually measure from the end. Measure all the way around your opening, and then when you come round to this side, we want to position this one so you've got a gap of about 1 centimetre between the satin stitch and the next piece of satin stitch, because that's going to come down here. Right, so this is where this collar will finish. So add about 1 centimetre, and that will be your final length for your collar to fit. So when you've done your seam, this is where this collar will finish, with a gap. Hopefully it will make a bit more sense when it's pinned and tacked on and you'll be able to see what I've done. Okay, I hope you're going to be able to understand the next step, but I've just tacked the collar on for now so that I can see where it's going to finish on the edge of the blouse opening. And I've put a mark with tailor's chalk approximately in the middle of the zigzag there, and another mark where the satin stitch is, and then on the end there's another mark for another row of satin stitch, and that is on the edge there. And as you can see, I allowed for a little bit of excess on the velcro side. So now what I've got to do is take that pin out and then undo some of the tacking so that I can get the collar out of the way, and then I'm going to put it back on my machine and continue the pattern down the shirt front. Okay, this is showing the left side of the collar where I've continued down with a zigzag stitch, and you've got to allow for a bit of space for the satin stitch on the other side, which you'll see in a minute. And what I've also done is I've used embroidery stabilizer on this, because when you try to do this sort of embroidery on single thickness fabric, it tends to crease up. So if you haven't got any embroidery stabilizer, you can just use a few sheets of tissue paper that you can then take off when you've finished. This is showing the right side of the blouse, and where I made those marks, that is where I've been doing my embroidery. So okay, that's a bit better, getting somebody to hold the camcorder for you. Right, where I made those little marks with the tailor's chalk, that's where I've done 2 rows of satin stitch and a row of zigzag stitch. So when your collar is on, like so, it should match up when it's finished, and then that will turn underneath like so. Just try. So if you can just bear with me, just to try and show you what it will look like when the velcro is together. You will see that that row of satin stitch now runs parallel with that one, and this zigzag stitch comes down onto the shirt. So hopefully that's what it will look like when it's finished. Right, I've now sewn on the collar, and when you're sewing on a collar you've got to go as far as you can up to the seam line, so make sure that is flat. So you're trying to get as far as you can up to the end of the satin stitch there, so that when you turn the whole thing the right way out, it will start to look like this. And as you can see, the satin stitch has carried on and the zigzag has carried on. So what I will do now is cut out some of this interfacing to cut down on the bulk a bit, ready for turning the collar. Okay, turn over the top like so, and then fold it in, then give that edge a good iron. And now what I'm doing is I'm just catch stitching through the satin stitch to the back, just to hold that in place, and do that all the way down. Okay, after catch stitching it down, I've actually used the satin stitch to my advantage there, and I've gone through the satin stitch through to the other side just to hold that velcro in place, then run a few stitches across the top just to close it up a bit. Now we're going to the inside, and we're going to neaten off the collar. Now I don't know how best to do this, but what I need to do is to fold all this up and then catch the collar in it, and I'm not really sure how to go about this because I have this piece of fabric here that really shouldn't be there, and I'm not sure how to go about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to snip up there. There's probably a technique out there for doing it, but I don't know what it is. All that allows me to do is to push the whole lot upwards so you can see your sewing line. Then you can see what I'm doing. Fold up your collar seam, push it up inside the collar like so, and then you'll be creating a seam on the top fabric, and then you'll be folding that down so you can just about see your sewing line. Then this is going to be hand sewn all the way across. Hope that makes sense.
Just quickly mentioning the colour number thread that we used to do the embroidery on the shirt, because we completely forgot. It's colour 715 in Gutterman thread. It's not an embroidery thread, but this was the closest colour that I could find that looked right with the colour shirt fabric. So that's the thread I used on my shirt.